Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast, coming to you live from hell, or as I like to call it, Bristol, in the middle of a heatwave. I'm Julian in Bristol.
And I'm Zoe, and I live near Bristol actually, but I'm in the Forest of Dean, just next to Chepstow. Yeah, and you asked for a background, which was I'm retired broadcast journalist. I used to be with the BBC, and before that, chartered accountant working in international business.
And I'm Dr. Natacha Kennedy. I'm an academic. I work at Goldsmiths College here in boiling hot London.
Oh dear, you and Chris would have got on like a house on fire. Chris isn't joining us this episode, unfortunately, listeners. He's currently shut in the middle of a dark room with a massive migraine. So we're plowing on ahead. Now, I've actually been wanting to do this episode since last year, but unfortunately, Rishi Sunak called an election and we had to change focus. The last example of the Conservative Party ruining my plans. We're doing it this episode. We're doing it live. I want to talk about this Pride Month, trans rights in the UK. Surely an uncontroversial topic to talk about. First off, let's start with an easy one from Chris that he sent over. What does pride mean to you two?
Pride is a lot of things, but for me, it's about struggle. It's about telling people we are here, we exist. Yes, it can be a party as well. I usually go on the march and I carry banners. I've got a really big piece of card. This I haven't decided what to write on it. I'm not very good at slogans, and then I go and have a drink with some friends after that, because it's usually on a nice warm day like this one in London. I think we need to remember what things were like in the past. I mean, I think it was 1966 or 1967? Being a gay man was illegal. We've only had the Gender Recognition Act since 2004, and the government was pushed into that by trans people going to the European Court of Human Rights. And they're already trying to take trans people's human rights away, all of them. And I think we need to remember places like the Stonewall Inn, Compton's Cafeteria, and some of the other places where trans people have needed to resist and needed to fight for our rights. So that's what it means to me.
I'm involved with Pride locally. On next Saturday, we have a Pride event, a small one, over at Caldicot, which is a town next to Chepstow in South Wales. And I think it's very important there. This is a town with a very difficult demographic. And I think for a lot of young people to see what's going on, maybe they've been hiding away, either anywhere in the LGBTQIA spectrum, hiding away, suddenly seeing us boldly out there in Caldicot Castle, having a great time. But it was serious as well. And last Sunday, that's yesterday, I was in Chepstow, where they also had a small Pride event. And we're seeing these small Pride events burgeoning all across the country. I think in Wales alone, there are now something like 40-odd Pride events, and obviously far, far more than that in England. And it's a matter of visibility. To me, visibility is a thing every day, as I'm sure it is for Natacha, and that's important, that people see me confident, whether it be in Tesco's or walking around as I went to see a concert in Cardiff on Saturday night, whatever it may be. But when you see Pride, you see a large gathering. It's almost a shock to me to see how many trans women were there, even at the event in Chepstow. It is celebratory, but it does have that really serious undertone. And this year I feel it more acutely than I did last year.
I think also this year with the Pride March in Hungary, in Budapest, demonstrated that it's still needed and that we still have allies and we still need to rely on our allies to turn up for us. Trying to ban Pride in Budapest really backfired on the fascists in Hungary. And I think when you start to ban things these days, you are asking for a really, really negative response. You're asking for trouble for yourself. And I suspect Starmer is going to find himself in trouble. There's a lot more people behind us than than I think he reckons.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was, again, when I was in Chepstow on Sunday yesterday, I met up with Catherine Fuchs, who's the Labour MP for Monmouthshire. And she's on the Equalities Select Committee, and she spoke up and questioned and criticised Baroness Faulkner very strongly. Frankly, Faulkner's but competence and performance at the Equalities Committee was a shambles.
Mm.
And it was demonstrated, and we have another MP in Newport who is also strongly supportive of the trans community. I don't know what the numbers are overall in the Labour Party, but there's enough to challenge Starmer. Whether he's willing to listen, I think is really open to question, isn't it? I mean, he's not listening to them on the disability benefits, not very well anyhow. So, and I said to Catherine, my worry is that with the total mess that's been made of what's going on disability benefits and the kind of compromises, I'm frightened that they'll come up with some compromise along the same lines for the trans community. But from our perspective, you can't compromise with bigotry.
It's interesting because for the West England Bylines YouTube channel, the other contributor, Alan Dixon, did a video about the first Pride event being held in Thames, Oxfordshire, which is like a small little village or town, and it's very peculiar to see like the differences between stuff like that, where people are very excited about, this thing happening in a small corner of Oxfordshire, that not a lot of people will know about. And then in Budapest, where Viktor Orban said, "No, no pride for you, or I'm going to sue you," and everyone just went, "You can't sue all of us," and just came marching out. Yeah, it's very interesting how you talk about like how pride seems to have changed since the anti-buggery laws were abolished in 1968, I believe, where it first became like a much more of a protest, and then as time went on, and you see this in one of my favorite movies, Pride 2014, where they start to go, well, we've had the protest, now it's time to party. So how did you two become involved in the Bylines Network, if you don't mind me asking?
I've actually written a couple of articles. I wrote one that was nothing to do with trans at all, actually, in East Anglia Bylines, because I come from East Anglia. There isn't a Bylines in London, so that's right. Okay, where I come from is East Anglia. I wrote about how the Labour Party needs to really react to the threat of reform and needs to do some things like electoral reform, but also needs to do things like restricting the amount of individual donations that can be given to political parties. I think I suggested a maximum of 2% of median income or something like that. I think it would be a 1,500, 1,800 quid or something like that a year, which I think is, not unreasonable. Most people still couldn't afford to donate that to parties. But at the time, it was when Elon Musk was threatening to donate like $1 billion or something like that to reform. And I think that's, yeah, I think that is something we have to guard against. So we're going to end up with politics being like in the United States, where it's just money, 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 money. And I mean, Kamala Harris had a war chest of $1 billion and still lost. It is completely ridiculous. So I think that was one of the things that sort of got me into it. I did write another one, actually for Sussex Bylines, about this fine meted out to Sussex University, which in my view was completely unjustified. I think now basically it seems like they want to fine universities for being trans inclusive or supporting trans rights, or even to ban transphobia, which is completely ridiculous. So I wrote about that as well. I mean, these are both things that aren't going to be talked about in mainstream media, are they? So, or at least not from the right perspective.
The reason that I sort of became aware of the whole Bylines network was because I was very, very actively involved in Bristol in the anti-Brexit campaign there. And I think a lot of us who were left as a total mess after all of that happened felt the need to be involved with a group of people of a similar a similar outlook. Anyhow, I've written a couple of articles for West England Bylines on the trans issues. The last one of which I pointed out the history of the Labour Party in government is not socially liberal. You have to go all the way back to Roy Jenkins back in the 1960s in Wilson's government to find a Home Secretary, a Labour Home Secretary, who was socially liberal. So I had a good go at them about that, and that was before any of the current stuff happened. And yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I remember when Keir Starmer won, I said, "Happy 20th term for Margaret Thatcher." I can't put it off any longer. On to some more serious topics, I'm afraid. A couple of months ago, as of this recording, the Supreme Court made a decision about gender recognition bill that Scotland has been trying to get through, and they ruled that the gender recognition bill was not trans inclusive. They did also try and say, rather hilariously, in my opinion, this is not meant to be a victory for either group. Everybody don't celebrate. Well, people were literally popping champagne out of literally on the doorstep of the Supreme Court. Can you just talk us why this was like such an emotional gut punch, it seemed, to the trans community?
I think it was a really problematic judgment in many, many ways, partly because it was factually wrong. I mean, literally, there is factual evidence that contradicts the facts that they relied on. So it wasn't the judgment so much, it was the fact that it was being made by a court which could not be appealed. Yeah, it was a judgment that literally cannot be appealed unless we go to the European Court of Human Rights. There is plenty of evidence, documentary evidence, including from Hansard, which says that literally the facts that they relied on were wrong. So I think that it's not just the fact that it was a particularly oppressive judgment for trans people, but the fact that it relied on completely false information. I think it also, what we've seen here is a situation where the court did not allow trans people in to make our case. Yeah, we had two lawyers who said, you know, we're here, we're ready to make trans people's cases. They didn't allow that. We've then had the Equalities and Human Rights Commission try and make their quite ridiculous interpretation of it. Again, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has never had a trans commissioner, even though it spent about a third of its existence trying to talk about trans people, in most cases to remove our human rights. So, like things like the Cass Review as well, places where where decisions are being made about us are being closed to us. We are being kept out of the room where the decisions are being made. And that's why, in part, these decisions are going against us. We're kept out of the media as well. I mean, we are hermetically sealed out of mainstream media. Marty Davies counted, what was it, 6,500 articles about trans people in 2023, which is 18 a day. Almost all of those anti-trans, almost all of those hostile to trans people. I suspect the number of articles that were actually written by trans people was in single figures. There were so few that it's difficult to count. So everything is about excluding. It's about silencing trans people in all possible forums where we are being debated, where our lives are being debated, where decisions about us are being made. And I think that's terribly, terribly dangerous. And I think anyone, even, you know, if you're neutral on this issue, you should be worried about that, because it is very, very undemocratic. If you're part of any minority group, you should be really worried about it, because they're coming for you next, as we have seen in other places like the United States. So I think it's very much been about silencing, excluding, keeping us out of spaces where we are being discussed. We're being discussed as if we're kind of over there we're a thing that hasn't got any humanity and doesn't deserve to be listened to.
Jules, if I can comment, I mean, obviously I agree with everything that Natasha says. The gut punch you mentioned is how it came to me. If I could talk emotionally about this, I was just listening to the radio. It was just one morning at about 10 o'clock, I think it came across on the news. I was actually listening to a music radio station, but it came across on the news. And I just, my blood ran cold. It ran cold. And I think for me, the biggest insult, the way to hurt me most, is to say I'm not a woman. Nothing hurts me, nothing disorients me more. I'm not good at handling that. And I guess it plays to the feelings that many trans women, well, speaking for myself, I definitely do have from time to time, of fighting with this imposter syndrome because my body is never good enough. I'm never good enough to be the woman that I feel that I am. And it just felt, okay, well, now the most senior court in the land has ruled in the worst possible way, describing me as not being a woman. It's one thing being shouted at in the streets, something horrible to that effect, or indeed having the gang saying horrible things. I can sort of see them. Okay, they're horrid. They're horrid. But when it comes from the Supreme Court, and then afterwards from Starmer himself, that viscerally scared me. It's left me frightened because these are the highest authorities in the land who are saying, yes, you're not a woman, really. And then it feeds into other people, all this stuff. And gradually, I feel, not so gradually maybe, but this feeling of being a target in society. That, okay, everybody's talking about it. Even those who are kind and nice to me seem to look differently at me now, almost a look of sympathy. Oh dear, it must be hard for you, yeah?
My reaction is swear word, swear word. I'm sorry, I'm too well brought up. No one is going to tell me who I am. No one, never, ever. Yeah, I decide who I am, not anybody, not some idiot in the street, not the Supreme Court. But I think one thing that they have obviously got wrong is the biological sex stuff. There is a poem written by a priestess called Enheduanna. She wrote it about 2270 BC. Okay, it's called Hymn to Inanna. She was the high priestess of the moon god in the city of Ur, which is now in southern Iraq, but in those days was in southern Mesopotamia. It's in the Bible. This was written hundreds of years, if not millennia, before Athens, Rome, Alexandria were even villages. Yeah, and one of the lines in this poem, just observing sort of a list poem, observing all the things that she saw around her and could attribute to this goddess, said to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man are yours, Inanna. Now that's a poem that's 43 centuries old. Okay. We think about the Romans being ancient history. Well, that's 16 centuries ago. This is 43 centuries ago. And the even more relevant, more interesting thing about this was, although writing had been around for about 1500 years before Enheduanna wrote this poem, nobody knew who wrote any of it. She was literally the first known author in the entirety of human history. Yeah. And one of her first poems talked about trans people.
Mm.
Yeah. So we've been around for as long as ever. Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about Mesopotamia, because I'm fairly certain there is also a legend from Mesopotamia about their version of the goddess of love literally getting rescued from the underworld by what we would call a non-binary person.
But the thing is, we have always been here. I mean, I don't particularly speak for archaeologists, but there are archaeologists who have got remains that they have designated as trans people that are 90 centuries old.
Hmm.
Yeah. 90 centuries ago, you could literally walk from mainland Europe to England. Yeah, that's how old, that's how long we've been around. Now, if that doesn't mean we are biological, then what does? Yeah, the fact that there have always been trans people, it's part of the natural diversity of the human race. Yeah, we are all different. And I think that's not to essentialize it. You won't find a trans gene, in my opinion. And just in the same way, you won't find a gay gene. I think people who are now keep looking for gay genes are kind of it's a little bit funny, you know.
No, it's the
Um,
vaccines that do it.
yes, or it's manga or something like that. It's 43 centuries old manga, you know.
I love I love that concept that being gay is just something the Japanese export to the rest of the world.
I just would like to take you away a little bit from 4,000 years ago to really my own insecurities, because Natacha, you may very well, and I have to believe that you are, very much in your own head and very clear about who and what you are. But I'm not in that kind of way. And I think many trans people that I know, and I've set up this support group nearby where I live, um, social anxiety is a very big factor amongst the mental health problems that many who are perhaps because of society's attitude of us towards us are really intimidated over long periods of time. And this isn't by intellectual thought, it is simply by the basic ignorance or bigotry, or call it what you like, of general people in society that we have to live with. And I know, for example, Natacha, when we were fighting Brexit, the difficulty was we could come up with all this data, all this information that would show how damaging it was. But ultimately, it was the emotional arguments that prevailed, that this sense that we were being taken control of elsewhere. And I think this is what's happening a lot right now with the discussions around transgender people. That what's happening is those who seek to harm us are simply portraying people like me as some kind of physical threat. They're creating, inventing fears of what we might be. This is not an intellectual process. It is simply doing what bigots do, or people who are phobic, which is irrational fear, fueling irrational fears of who we are. And I'm an emotional person too. And, when I've heard all this stuff against us being spoken, legitimized in a way, bigotry being legitimized by the government, and certainly by the EHRC, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, that I find that frightening. And I guess I'm more easily scared than you are, Natacha, but I am and have been frightened. I don't make no bones about it.
I mean, I totally understand that. And it is a scary situation. One of the things, though, that I've always done, it's a kind of rationalization of that. Okay. I think about how they have to hermetically exclude us from mainstream media. They have to exclude us from Cass. They had to exclude us from Sullivan. They've had to exclude us from the Supreme Court. They've had to exclude us from the EHRC. They've excluded us from government. There are no trans MPs or even peers. They are enacting measures to keep us excluded all the time, as well as piling on this kind of anti-trans bigotry and hatred, and that kind of thing. And that makes me think, well, if binary biological sex is so strong, then why does it need all of these totally unreasonable, totally ridiculous things to protect it? In the end, the ideology of binary biological sex is really fragile. It's more than fragile, it's brittle. And I think this is one of the things that we all need to remember. Yeah. Not only have we always been here, not only are all trans people the sex they claim to be, their biological sex, but the enormous amount of power and money, it's top-down power. All bigotry, particularly transphobia, is top-down bigotry. They want us to give up. And I'm not going to give up because I know their power, their ideology is brittle, fragile, and it will come tumbling down. You see, I mean, you saw in America that Trump has had to pack the Supreme Court and spend billions of dollars on anti-trans adverts during his campaign. I think he spent $134 in advertising in the US, yeah, for each trans person.
The
Yeah,
figure was actual total figure in his election campaign, I think totaled well over $200 million.
yeah, yeah.
Lord.
So I haven't divided that by
Somebody, I think Erin Reed did that, divided it,
yeah.
came up with $134 per individual trans person, which is ridiculous. You know, if they're having to do that, if they're having to lock us out of the media, there must be something terribly wrong. That's the way I figure it.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Natasha, because I do remember after the Supreme Court's ruling came about, I did see quite a lot of anti-trans accounts saying, "Oh God, they're still going. Why on earth are they still going?" Because at least for that crowd, I get the feeling that they're mostly just like white middle class pensioners who feel like protesting is like more of a hobby rather than a way of protecting our way of life or your way of life in this case. So for them, this was an important cause, but now that the Supreme Court, it's over for them. Whereas for like trans people like yourselves, you're gonna keep going because it's like, what else is there we can do? And I do actually want to add some positivity into this because I'm sure this is very depressing to listen to. God knows I find it depressing to listen to. I think I do completely agree with you, Sasha. This is a very brittle way of thinking, and we've seen this since 1968 when the anti-buggery laws got repealed. Because we've been through this before. We've seen gay people be portrayed as like predators and groomers and just a danger to women. But then as society has moved on from 1968, at least in this part of the world, the wider public has become more and more accepting. But that might not have always reflected in our laws, like Section 28, for example, but that got repealed eventually. I've no doubt in my mind that if we keep going, and if younger generations get more and more accepting as polls say they are, at least with this issue anyway, we will be looking back at this Supreme Court ruling in the same way that we look back at Section 28.
Your optimism, yes, but is what I would say, because at the moment we are seeing across Europe and the United States the movement much more towards populism. And populism means things being simple, things being absolutely straightforward. Everything is black and white, and there isn't the nuance. It really is the sort of opposite of everything, the sort of liberal way that we think and have thought in our liberal democracies. But it's changing, and at the moment the trends are very worryingly persisting. And the opinion polls, obviously, with reform, they may not hold up in 4 years' time. Who knows? But as we talk now, it's not looking so good. Yes, it's extremely encouraging to see in Hungary what happened. What Orban will do next, I don't know. But and you also mentioned, Jules, about the repeal of Section 28. Blair had been in government for years and years before that happened. It didn't just happen in 1997. I think it happened around about 2004 that they repealed.
2003.
Thank you.
I was a teacher then.
Oh no.
So it didn't happen quickly. I think in history, looking at it, is truly astonishing that the Labour Party took that long to repeal it. I just don't think they care that much. I certainly don't think that Keir Starmer sees this anything other than an inconvenience. And when he spoke in the House of Commons about that ruling from the Supreme Court, I had the sense, oh, well, that's a relief. All my problems with this are now gone. It solved my problem. I don't have to be asked this question, what is a woman, anymore, which was very embarrassing for him. But he's learned differently now. And I hope you're right, Jules. I hope you're right. I hope that things will quieten down and that the Parliamentary Labour Party will deal with Starmer on that issue as they have done on disabilities. But it's hard to be terribly confident as the Labour Party, or should we say the government, not the Parliamentary Party, seems more interested in appeasing the populace than it is in introducing a genuinely liberal approach to life in the UK, affirming the kind of thing that all its voters in the big cities want to see. So I'm very cautious about being optimistic.
I actually wanted to add something positive as well. Certainly, living in London is going to be different from living in the west of England, but I've noticed, and a lot of other people have noticed as well, that there are, I mean, just in my corner of London, my local high street, I've seen plenty of trans people around, bumped into trans people. There have been trans people I've bumped into on the tube, on the station, on the train, all over the place in London now. There are just so many of us. It's almost like everybody's come out suddenly. I'd had a long session doing some writing and I needed a drink. So there's a little wine bar near me and it was a nice evening and they had tables outside. So I went and sat there and just had a glass of Puy Fumé, which I like a lot. It's a bit middle class around here, you can tell, but it's the woman sitting at the next table to me was trans. You know, it was just like, and when I moved here, I'm sure I was the only trans woman in the village. You know, I think there are more of us now than people think. And I think it's one of the things that is driving that, paradoxically, is this enormous amount of coverage of, even if it's negative coverage of us in the media, and it's making people, oh yeah, this maybe that's, you know, it's I've written about this in my academic publications. It is that kind of knowing. It's finding out a word for who you are, and once you get that, then you can come out because you realize that there are other people like you. If there's a word for it, there must be other people like you. I called it a mountain in the mist. Once you have this vocabulary and you can type it in to a computer and you can find stuff out, then you're suddenly in touch with the community. Yeah.
Well, I don't find it quite the same in Bristol, I have to say, but then I tend to occupy Bristol because I'm long retired in a time when my generation are out there, and you certainly don't see many people like myself at the age of 80 who are out there as trans, whereas amongst the young generation, that's certainly, I think they are emboldened in much greater numbers. No, I don't. I'm sorry if I sound all pessimistic, but the fact that my life expectancy is limited, the kind of time period that, Jules, you'll be patient with and see as simply just a pattern in the passage of time, and a very short time, particularly in the context of Natacha talking about 4,000 years. Yes, I think things don't stay the same. Nothing ever stays the same. But I am worried in the short term. I really am. And I think it's very hard. And I worry a lot about my mental health, but above all, the mental health of many of the young trans people that I know. And I think there's a lot of performative cruelty that's going on. I wonder if you'll allow me also to, I was going to try to speak about my experience at the BBC, which is out of date. But when I produced programs there, say, you had to work to things called producer guidelines. And the BBC, as you will know, goes very heavy on what they call balance. However, balance can be spurious. It's been spurious on many subjects. It's been spurious on the MMR vaccine, which you may remember, Natacha, where you had one doctor talking and the whole medical profession against him. but the BBC would wheel out either him or a mother who was convinced her child was autistic because of the MMR vaccine. You've had it on climate change for quite a while, not now. That they would always wheel out the climate skeptics as equal and opposite to all this vast array of scientists that believed that it was nonsense to deny climate change. And I think today we see with trans people, if the BBC were to talk to the medical profession, they'll get a very different picture. But the way they do it is, if they do interview someone like me, and I was interviewed on Radio Bristol after the Supreme Court ruling, then they wheel out the usual transphobe. And so all of this happens even when we do put our head above the parapet. But I have to say that by and large, if I were, for example, asked to go onto a live program to sit across from one of those people who seem to, I'm trying to be polite in the context here, the transphobes, I don't want to be a part of debate. I am not a debate. And you'll hear this from many trans people. Please don't frame me. Don't frame me as a debate, and don't frame me as an activist. I'm simply trying to live my life. And if you threaten me, I will tend to say something. But the BBC is obsessed with the idea that there is now a real debate. And the problem with that is, if you say there's a real debate, and this is reinforced by what's being said in Parliament, then you are reinforcing transphobia. Because you'd never say the same about homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism. But it's okay to do that right now with transphobia.
I just, every time I go on the BBC or get invited onto the BBC, if there's any inkling that somebody might be up against me, I don't care what transphobia is, I just will not do it. I refuse. Yeah. And I will ask and ask and ask. And eventually they realize that the reason I'm asking is because when they do sneak someone on late, then I will refuse. I remember Paris Lees was invited on to some program on the BBC, and they didn't tell her that there was going to be a transphobe. And it turns out there was someone, I don't know who it was, speaking against her, literally when she walked into the studio. Yeah. So she just turned around and walked out again. And she just said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I think that's the way to do it. After all, you find the BBC will only do balance for us. Yeah. They will quite happily platform a transphobe without any trans person to oppose them. All over the place. They do it all the time. And so, a lot of other places do as well. I was talking about that 8,500, 6,500 articles and that sort of thing. They do it all the time. The only time they will allow us on is access to mainstream media is when someone is opposing us. Yeah. Again, they're so brittle. They cannot allow us to have the microphone even for a few seconds without someone shouting us down. Do they have someone, whenever you're talking about astronomy or anything going up in space, do they have a flat earther on?
It's furious. I mean, this idea of balance has to be regarded very carefully. And it's you often hear this business of what a journalist should be doing is simply looking out the window and see if it's raining or not. They shouldn't just be looking at the idea of getting into the studio on the one hand, on the other. If the reality is different, the BBC seems unable to make any kind of moral assessment. Indeed, the government does too. Is this a moral position to take? Or is this inherently, evil? And I think transphobia is evil. It's a very bad thing to be. I think to be a phobe of anything. I mean, I don't claim to be pure in terms of being innocent of all kind of phobia, but I like to recognize it in me and to tell myself off. It's bad. And it's cruel to talk about us like this. I mean, again, I know this is not a very academic idea, this idea of cruelty and bullying, but I feel that is what is being done publicly now in the name of a government and its agencies. And I'm shocked. I am deeply shocked to see this in my lifetime.
Last question before we get on to the fun stuff. I've got this. With trans rights being where they are right now. I think we've gone from like number one in terms of queer rights in the UK down to like 22 with Viktor Orban's Hungary not too far away from us, but still below us, but not too far away from us. What do you want to see from allies? Like, how can listeners go beyond passive support and take like meaningful action? Because that's what I wanted to point out earlier. I am optimistic, but all this optimism is based on we still have to keep fighting. So how do people do that?
Well, there are a few people in the performance industries, actors, and or even people like Stephen Fry, starting for the first time to speak out on our behalf. And I think desperately from trans allies, we don't just need kindness, welcome though that is. We need people to say these kind of things, or at Glastonbury to speak out and say how terrible it is and sing about it and so on. I think the willingness of our allies, of whom I know there are many, but actually to realize it's not enough to stay quiet. It's not enough to turn up at Pride events and smile kindly at us, and thank you for doing that. But please, you can go on here. If you may be in a better position to go on, take these transphobes on, in a debate, if there has to be a debate like that, than many of us would feel that we would ever want to, because it's so humiliating. So speak out publicly whenever you can.
I would second that. I would also, I mean, I've just organised a big conference in London not last weekend, the weekend before, 21st, Midsummer's Day, for FGen, which is an academic anti-transphobia and feminist group. And we had some very good allies speaking for us. We had Joe Morm of the Good Law Project. He was the first keynote. We also had the mother of a trans child who came and spoke. Very, very emotional. I think what we are actually seeing now is we're getting more support from people who are close to trans people. Obviously, partners of trans people are very supportive, but we're also seeing parents, we're seeing siblings, we're seeing children of trans people, and we're seeing friends of trans people being more active and more vocal. I was talking to a visitor at my university from Yorkshire, lives in a small rural village in Yorkshire. And when the government was thinking about blocking the self-identification law in Scotland, her two kids got on a train and went up to Glasgow to protest. Yet both cis, neither of them actually know any trans people personally. They live in a small village, but they went up on a train to do that. I think we're actually seeing more of that. We probably don't think we're seeing more of that. I mean, and I think we could be asking some of our allies to do a bit more, write to MPs, use the link online and write to the Prime Minister, let them know that what they're doing is unpopular. One of the things I've been trying to figure out at the moment as an academic, I'm not a specialist in statistics and quantitative stuff, but I'm trying to figure out what the trans vote is bigger than the number of trans people. Yeah, because of this. So people will vote on trans issues. They'll probably normally vote Lib Dem or Green. Okay, there aren't any other parties to vote for now from that perspective. But who will that vote be? It will definitely be partners. It will almost certainly be parents these days. It will probably be grandparents. So I think actually we need to start looking at it in that way. The trans vote is bigger than the number of trans people. And yeah, turn up at Pride, donate to things like Good Law Project. Because Good Law Project has already had some success against this Supreme Court judgment. The EHRC said employers have to exclude trans people from toilets at work. Yeah. Well, actually, no, they haven't. Good Law Project challenged that and the EHRC backed down. I think there's probably going to be more of that. So yes, you can use whatever loo you need to at work. That's going to be quite a big deal in my area as a university lecturer, because I use the same loos as the students. Yeah, I think it's the same in most FE colleges as well, probably in other places as well. The staff are going to be using the same toilets as the clients, if you like, the other people there. So it's going to be really difficult for universities to ban students from using the correct toilets if staff are going to be using them anyway. There are allies out there, and they are doing stuff, and we need to encourage. We need to make it more easier for them to become allies. I mean, there's this petition that's going around at the moment, nigh on Not in Our Name. It's cis women supporting trans rights and opposing transphobia. I think it's getting close to 37,000 signatures now. Well, there was a petition a few years ago now. It's called the Women's Declaration International or something. It's very anti-trans stuff, and they managed to get 39,000 signatures on that. Yeah, but it took them 6 years to do that. All right. I mean, this petition is 37,000 nearly, and it's been going for 6 weeks. I think there are more supporters out there, and I think we have to encourage them. I suspect there's going to be, because there are more of us around, there are more trans people in different locations. I mean, I visit Lancashire quite regularly, and there are trans people I'm bumping into there. So I think it's a case of working locally, getting people together, getting our allies together, and drawing allies in and saying, okay, what can I do, and giving them some suggestions what they can do, write to MPs and things like that. I think also it's important to remember that actually, I think it was Masha Gessen who said, our institutions will not protect us. They are a non-binary writer who writes for The New Yorker, and they were right. What protects our human rights is everybody else. People need to know that things like safe and legal abortion, yes, it's still under threat. They're still threatening doctors who carry out safe and legal abortions. If you are any kind of minority at all, whether you're black, you're Asian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're an immigrant, any kind of marginalized group, whether you're cis, LGB, whoever you are, your rights are being threatened by the fact that they're taking our rights away. Right stripping doesn't stop at us. And, whose rights are next in line is the question to ask. So I think we need to push that a lot better on programs like this, where we do have a bit of access, as opposed to...
I'm doing my part.
Well, thank you. I'll put you alongside Julian Moore as one of my heroes then.
Oh, good Lord.
I would echo, really what Natacha's been saying about the extraordinary work being done by the Good Law Project. But also, I think it helps if you get Hollywood actors wearing these t-shirts saying "Protect the Dolls." I mean, that's very, very visible. It makes people curious. What's that about? It immediately draws people in to be curious. But the other thing,
talking about Pedro Pascal and David Tennant. God bless them.
Yeah, indeed. The LGBT community, plus all those straight people, and there are many who go to Pride events, do represent a significant percentage, even though we trans people do not.
So continuing on a tradition that me and Chris have only done once, we are going to be talking... Yeah, they have to start somewhere. I have asked Natacha and Zoe and Chris and myself to recommend a piece of queer media, media that's either written by the LGBT community or is about the LGBT community. And I'm going to start off with Chris's first because he's not here, and he's given me what he was going to present. He would like to recommend Will and Harper on Netflix, which is, and I can say this with some gusto because I have seen it and it is beautiful. It's like a brilliant documentary starring Will Ferrell, unsurprisingly, going on a cross-country road trip with his longtime friend Harper Steele, who, at the time of recording that film, had recently come out as a trans woman. Talks about like Harper's life since they came out, and Will Ferrell talks about very frankly I might add, about how he reacted to it and how he's still got like complicated feelings about it. One of my favorite scenes in it is Will Ferrell being the nice guy, Hollywood guy, literally just talking to a bunch of people in a bar in a red state. I think it was Texas. And he just so happened to talk to a very anti-trans politician. And he was being all Will Ferrell about it, but just being like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. This is my friend Harper. And the guy was being very polite to Harper, by the way. And then literally slap cut to the next scene of Will Ferrell bawling his eyes out because he found out who he was nice to and how he thought he had completely let his friend down in front of his friend. It was, it's a beautiful film, not just about the journey of the car trip, but the journey that Will Ferrell took on about being an ally, and a beautiful journey that Harper took on since she came out. So that's Chris's recommendation. Zoe, what's your recommendation?
Well, I'm now nervous it may also have been chosen by Natacha, because Natacha mentioned Paris Lees, who I'm absolutely obsessed with Paris Lees and Paris's story. And she wrote a book called What It Feels Like for a Girl, which has now been adapted into a TV drama series, which has just been shown, just finished being shown on BBC Three, also went out late at night on BBC One, and is available on BBC iPlayer. And if you haven't read that book or seen the series, you won't know that I think it's remarkable, because Paris doesn't just tell the story of her being trans. It is almost written like a novel, the way she's done it, of her life over quite a short period of time, from about 14 to 20, I don't know, something like that. Mostly based in Nottinghamshire, in Nottingham or near there where she comes from, and her experience as a rent boy, and how naughty she was before she came out as a person, and ended up in jail for having played a part in a robbery, an armed robbery. And she is so honest, but it is so funny, it is so crazy, and it isn't just about being trans. You see a young person kind of running amok who happens to be trans, and gradually you see through the story her coming out and going around the clubs, dressed increasingly as a woman, and at the very end how she ends up at university in Brighton after her period in jail, where she excels. And Paris, really, I was drawn to Paris before she wrote her book, because I'd seen her on Question Time, because I'd looked at her YouTube videos, which gave me great succor when I was coming out. I admire her so much. She's so brilliant. She's so clever. And if you've not read the book, I really strongly recommend it. It's full of life, and it's pretty bleak as well, because, as she said with hindsight, she was abused, but she didn't feel it at the time.
I mean, I've got some other things to mention, but I would mention Paris. I know Paris. We haven't communicated for a while, but she is amazing. She really is. And I read the book. I refused to pay my TV license because of all the transphobia and racism in the BBC. I'm married to an immigrant who's non-white, by the way. So I've got double reason not to pay my TV license. But I'll probably have to wait for a while to see it. I would at that point give a mention to one of our keynotes at FGen, Katie Montgomery, who has her own YouTube channel, who is amazing as well. But there are two things that I would like to I'm hogging the air because I talk too much as usual. I mean, one of them I wrote an academic paper about. It was Pose, the series set up. It sort of straddled the pandemic. And I've actually taken bits out of that to use to explain what it's like to be trans and things like that. One of the key quotes I got from that is Stan talking to Angel. I'm a brand. I'm a middle-class white guy. But you're who you are, even though the price you pay for it is being disinvited from the rest of the world. I'm the one playing dress up. Is it wrong to want to be with one of the few people in the world who isn't? To have one person in my life who I know is real? You think of me as a real woman? You'd be crazy to choose this life if you didn't have to. Yeah. Now, that's, in my opinion, that demonstrates the authenticity of trans people, and it's one of the things that the transphobes cannot cope with, because basically every transphobe is a very, very inauthentic person.
Mm.
So I mean, it's up and down. There are some good bits of Pose and some genius bits and some not so good bits, but I've enjoyed it very much. The other one I would recommend, and I don't know whether the author was queer or not, but it's about transitioning. It's Orlando by Virginia Woolf. And there's parts of that book that make me cry. It's beautiful, so beautifully written, as you would expect from Virginia Woolf. And I saw the film and I thought I have to read the book. And the book is a million times better than the film, actually, and the film's pretty good. So I would seriously recommend reading that. It's wonderful. I'm told it was supposed to be about Vita Sackville West, which was interesting as well. And there's maybe some sort of relationship going on there. I'm not totally sure. Every now and then I go, and it's like a pilgrimage. I go and visit Charleston House down near Brighton, just to see Virginia Woolf's house and stuff like that. But yeah, if you get the chance, read Orlando. I love it. It's fantastic. It's not that queer or anything, but it is just so beautifully written.
Well, thank you very much for that, Natasha. I'm recommending a graphic novel. I picked this up recently. It's called I Shall Never Fall in Love, and it is a Regency era queer romance.
Wow.
I'm just going to read you the blurb because that basically not sums up perfectly, but it's 1818. Three friends are coming of age. It's not going to plan. To be a perfect lady, you have to fall in love with a man. So why is Eleanor finding it so hard? Her cousin, Charlotte, should be looking for a practical match, not following her heart. And her best friend, George, is supposed to have grown out of wearing men's clothes, and they're definitely not meant to be looking at her like that. It's very cute. It's a very cute book. If you like Pride and Prejudice and thought this could be a bit more gay, it's basically the book for you. It's about these three friends who have effectively grown up together, trying to find their place in a world that's not necessarily built for them. Particularly George, who I don't know if they're non-binary or not, but they start wearing men's clothes, and there's this massive like will they, won't they between them and their best friend Eleanor, who's wondering why on earth she gets extremely flustered recently when George starts dressing in men's clothes, despite not being a guy. It's very good. Would recommend it. I Shall Never Fall in Love by Harry Connor, who's a non-binary writer, I believe. And at the end, they give you like a bunch of facts about how black people and queer people lived in Georgian England, because one of the characters is black and two of the characters are very gay. So it's very interesting. Would recommend it for that bit alone. That brings us to the end of our time here. Natasha, Zoe, thank you very much for providing me with the privilege of yourselves. It's genuinely been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be. It's been a pleasure to be interviewed sympathetically.
Yeah.
That's something.
I try my best.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and thank you also, Jules, for giving me this opportunity. And it's wonderful for me to kind of quasi meet Natasha, who I've been following for quite a few years as this great authority, figure in the trans community. And I'm slightly in awe that you know Paris. I'd do anything to meet her. There we are. But thank you, Jules. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Natasha in London.
And I'm Zoe, near Bristol, in the Forest of Dean.